welcome. And Kathy, I'll pass it to you to officially get us started.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Quick, and I'm a state specialist in leadership and civic engagement with the University of Minnesota Extension. And I'm here with a team of people, community members, and university folks who have been part of this project. We'll be introducing ourselves as we go. So we are going to, as you may have noticed when you joined, this is being recorded. Later, we will have some breakout rooms for people to process the data together that will be sharing some of the findings, think through that, think through some opportunities, perhaps for some regional collaborations or patterns that you see. Those portions of the conversation will not be recorded, but they will be really great opportunities for you to just revisit the data that we'll be sharing today with other folks. So if we could go to the next slide, Andy. Thank you for this, for joining us. We are going to begin with an overview of the background for this research. But before we do that, the facilitators and participants in this would love to know who's here. We saw the registration list, but it would be really helpful to know. Could you please in the chat enter your name and the town that you're from, one or two infrastructure questions or concerns that brought you here today, and maybe one asset that you feel is particularly strong and important for your community's well-being or your community identity. Because we never want to just focus on the negative. We also want to be sure that we're sustaining the things that are extremely important. And our two presenters later will be looking at that and just kind of threading that into the conversation. So I think that was our kickoff, and I'm going to hand it back to Andy to really talk about the background for this project.
Oh, and I can hand it right to Dave, our community partner. Yeah, no worries, Kathy. But Dave, go ahead and
I'll
give
step
us a
in
little
and
bit of
intercept that.
context.
I'll intercept that pass. My name is Dave Schmidt, and I'm with Community and Economic Development Associates. And I work with the city of Winnebago, who started this project. And when you're looking at larger cities, it's easy to get information, but when you get into smaller cities, it's really hard to find detailed information. So we applied to ESMC to get a grant. And what we were looking at was trying to set up a survey to take a look at small communities. So we targeted communities between 500 and 2,000. And we had a wide range of infrastructure, amenity questions, social, economic, physical, trying to look at what strengths, what weaknesses there are, and then find a way to kind of gather that data, the collection tools, and use that as a foundation for further action. Next slide. So what we wanted to do was find out, are there gaps in data about different infrastructure types? What are some of the key resources? What infrastructure is in need of improvement or repair? Are there opportunities for support, comparative advantages? So, again, we picked a focus of communities between 500 and 2,000, looking at opportunities for collaboration, areas where we can prioritize our investment. And the big thing was just to be able to start conversations of where we're at and what we're doing, what some of those next steps might look like. Next slide.
So my name is Andy Sutton. I'm with University of Minnesota Extension. I'm with the Southeast Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, and we are one department of a 5-department university program called the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities program. So the collaborators are the RSDPs, as well as the Resilient Communities Project, the Humphrey School, the Center for Transportation Studies, and the Minnesota Design Center. And really, this program, it was supported by the Minnesota legislature. It's been operational for about 3 years and really is geared towards supporting small communities with populations of 15,000 or fewer with resources, technical services, expertise, capacity from University of Minnesota to help small communities realize these infrastructure visions. Just like the survey that Dave was talking about, we're defining infrastructure fairly broadly. economic, built infrastructure, social infrastructure are all sort of eligible for support by this Empowering Small Minnesota Communities program. It's by application, so it's not a traditional grant where funds go directly to a community to realize their goals or visions. What this is, it's an application-based, community-led process where communities can apply for support from University of Minnesota research teams, sometimes up to a year of collaboration with research teams. And some funding does go to the community lead as well to sort of realize some of the ideas that come out of this program. So this was one of the first projects in Southeast Minnesota that was supported by ESMC. I already talked about how it's focused on social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, built infrastructure, really geared towards like how can we use research to help communities create the materials they need, get the data that they might want, support some processes that help them move forward on their infrastructure visions, and ideally move forward towards some sort of additional funding or scale up or next step. So in the context of this project, which is very research oriented, that's why these breakout rooms and community discussions are so key, is that we have a lot of data we're excited to share with you that kind of points to some particular qualities or narratives about our Southeast Minnesota region. But ideally, these might spark among you all. They already have sparked conversations with in-person events about, what might be a next step for a collaborative proposal or some bonding or some other approaches that could be informed by this research and help the betterment of, the small communities who were involved. I'm going to pass it to Frank to talk about our research team.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Andy and Kathy and Dave for getting us off to a good start here. I am Frank Dalma. I'm a researcher at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and I got to sign all of the lines that said principal investigator, but that really means nothing in terms of whose contributions were most valuable. This was a terrific team to work with. And we look forward to the opportunity to present all of our data here. As we get going, I do want to mention that we have the chat, which many of you have found. Also, at least on my screen, under the More button, there is a Q&A selection. And so either of those will be available to you to ask any questions as we go. As we move through the day today and get to the breakout portion, Camilla will help, and I will especially be dedicating my time to responding to those questions. So in addition to the outstanding opportunity for you to contribute to this project and give us your feedback during the breakouts, if you stick around for those, we will be getting back to your questions. We do have quite a bit of data to get through, so we are going to try and keep ourselves focused at this time, but do appreciate everybody being here and really excited to see the interest today. So I'll point out just the rest of this team. You'll meet Camilla Fonseca, my colleague at the Institute for Urban and Regional Infrastructure Finance at the Humphrey School. She'll be presenting the second half of the data. At the beginning, you met Kathy Quick, also from the Humphrey School and Extension. You'll be hearing from her more as she helps run the breakout groups during the second half of today's webinar. Andy has been doing a great job of not only keeping this webinar together, but keeping this research together and on track. And she's a terrific person. If you don't know her and you're from Southeast Minnesota, you should make sure that you have a chance to meet her at some point in the near future. And finally, I'd like to give a shout out to Polina Vergara, who was a research assistant with us on this project. She's a PhD candidate in natural resources at the University of Minnesota, and just a whiz at creating maps with GIS, Geographic Information Sciences, and you'll see her contributions very, very soon, and then throughout the report of the data. So if we'd like to go to the next slide, what we're going to be presenting today is information that we received from a survey that we sent to 52 communities in Southeast Minnesota. as Andy mentioned, this is the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project. And so our focus was on communities with populations between roughly 500 and 2,000. Many of you on the participating today may have received and filled out that survey, and we're very, very grateful for that data. Otherwise, we would not have anything to talk about. We covered a lot in this survey, covering 17 categories ranging from large infrastructures from transportation, education, housing, telecommunications, and then also surveying a number of things that we defined as community assets that went on for a list that would be longer than any one slide could ever contain, but we will cover the highlights in our results. In the next slide. So this survey was online, conducted through Qualtrics, which the university has a contract on. So it was colored maroon and gold. You knew where it was coming from. We got 36 responses to our 52 approaches, and that's a completion rate of 70%, which is pretty good and really essential for a relatively small sample size like this. Mostly the responses were from city administrators. We sent for whom we directed most of the surveys, but we also heard from some city engineers, public works directors, and a few elected officials. We compiled this information and put it into these maps. We have a mapping tool that is available on the link you see there, but we will go much more in depth at the end of our presentation of the data to how to access this, but the data is available for you to work with and map yourself. So if there's other questions or other ways you'd like to analyze the data, you're welcome to do that. So yeah, we'll go on to the next slide. So I mentioned that we reached out to cities with populations of 500 to 2,000. We also noted that those cities live in the real world with proximity to larger cities. Some are closer, some are further, and I'll talk about that and the implications of that in just a moment. But we did want to point those out, and you'll see these what we called reference surveys show up on our maps nearly every time. And then of the cities that we surveyed, we grouped them into different population groups because they started to sort themselves that way. What we referred to as the smallest cities, populations 500 to 750, small to medium cities, 750 to 1,000. Medium-sized cities were 1,000 to 1,500, and then the large cities were the remaining cities with populations of 1,500 to 2,000. We'll go to the next slide. And so here we have them mapped out. You can see that we color-coded the respondents by the size of population, and we also note the reference cities with the small stars there, so you can see the proximity to cities like Rochester, Winona, Red Wing, etc. We'll go to the next slide. And when it comes to how the cities kind of lined up, we found that most of the respondents were within 10 to 25 miles of those reference cities, which becomes important to us because we wanted to kind of understand when there are some of these assets or services that are not available within the city limits of a responding city. How long of a trip is it to get to a larger city that might have some of those things? We note that that the cities that are furthest away from any given reference city were in the small, medium, and medium categories. The large cities tended to be all within 10 to 25 miles. And we'll get into the implications of that a little bit further in just a moment. And the next slide. So I mentioned there were 6 cities that were further than 25 miles from any of our reference cities. Overall, of the 36 respondents, they were an average of just under 15 miles from any major city. The closest was just under 6 miles. The furthest was nearly 30. And the 6 that were more than 25 miles away are the 6 that you see listed here. And you may know those cities, you may be from those cities, but wanted to kind of point out that it was something we paid attention to. We'll go to the next slide. And so I want to kind of point out, just as we're on the verge of getting to the data and our findings, is that while we were the ones, Camilla and I especially, who put the survey together in cooperation with Dave and with Bruce McKendry, who is also here, and Andy, we are researchers at the University of Minnesota, which you know is located in the Twin Cities. Compared to those of you who are participating and those who responded, we are not the experts, but we are the ones who came up with the survey and received the data, and so that's what we're going to report. But these are our interpretation. They're not final, they're not gospel. And we do look forward to hearing your thoughts and reactions and continue to refine this information as we go forward. And the next slide. And so here's the first preview of the data. We found that there is a lot of information here, and we found some good things and some things that may cause concern. And we'll get into that detail. But as we go through this, in preparation for the opportunity for you all to respond in the breakout groups and so forth, we want to have you think about these two questions. First of all, what patterns are you picking up? Is there something you'd like to call out to confirm, something that's a surprise, something that is just so unexpected that it doesn't seem right? And then moving forward from looking at the data, what opportunities do you see to support communities by optimizing the strengths that we identified that you think really are there? And how could we leverage the assets that we have in Southeast Minnesota to address areas that we might have picked up as areas of concern? I think those questions are going to be put into the chat right now so that you can have them in front of you. We'll also have them in front of you during the breakout discussion. The next slide. And so, time to dig into the data. I hope that's why you're here. But the first thing we looked at was that we had a perception that particularly in smaller communities, there has been changes in population and noticeable changes over at least the last 20 and 50 years, really. So we looked at how has the population changed in these cities since 2000, last 25 years. And we found that while there were no cities that reported a significant decrease, we did find 4 of the responding cities, one small to medium, one medium, and one large, that reported significant increases. And when you look at all of these put together, we have 50% reporting increases, the other with no change or a slight decrease. So generally speaking, we don't have somebody asking anyone to turn out their lights as they turn out the lights as they head out of the any of the cities that responded. The next slide. However, when we look back to 1970, 55 years ago now, 2 cities did note that they had a significant decrease, while we also have a large number of cities noting a significant increase. And that was something that we did want to highlight as we look forward, because there have been structural changes to the economy. There are structural changes to how we live in that time. And so we wanted to pay attention to what might be driving this significant growth and significant decrease. And we'll pull out some of those things that may have contributed to these changes as we go forward. Next slide. One thing we noticed go forward to the map, please. There we go. In looking at the change in the 25 years, is that those that reported a slight decrease were all concentrated in the southernmost part of the region. And an interesting Claremont sort of fit into there, but it's really more mid part of the state. But I do want to call it out because what we noticed in the 55-year trend. But it was interesting to see that possibly proximity to the Twin Cities is making a difference for the population change in the last 25 years. But we did see that sort of geographic trend. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is why you'll see I pointed out Claremont, because they noticed a decrease in the last 55 years as well. But that geographic trend did not hold across the southern region. We have a number of cities noting a significant increase throughout the region since 1970. But we do see that decrease in a couple of concentrated areas. And along with Claremont in the center of the region. And so that was something that caught our attention, that there could be some pockets where population change is happening. And we're wondering what that might mean for a number of the things that we paid attention to going forward. And go on to the next slide. And one of the kind of top of the line things that we wanted to look at were, does this translate into the amount of vacant land or vacant commercial and industrial buildings in the city? And does that relate to size? Does that relate to population change? As you'll see that most of the cities indicated that they do have some of these vacant properties throughout the region. So we wanted to check that out on a map and see what we saw. First, by doing just a scatter plot in the next slide, you can see that there did seem to be a trend here that the smaller cities had fewer facilities within their city limits, and that those smaller cities that reported that had a decrease in population since 2000. So this is kind of the first thing that we thought, well, maybe there's, we need to look into what are the assets, where maybe there's some opportunities for collaboration, because possibly there's a trend here of smaller cities have less amenities, getting smaller as time goes by. And then as we look to the next slide, then mapping that out, this is where we see that trend that we picked up since 2000. Again, in the southern part of the state, if one were to travel I-94 and get off at every exit, you might have a somewhat uninspiring, to put it lightly, trip through some downtowns, as you'll see a number of empty storefronts or underutilized industrial parks or things like that. At least that's what this initial take on the data showed us. And then as we look further at our data, we see that the percentage of a number of amenities within the cities, we see that recreation, culture, tourism, government and institutional things, those factors, those assets were somewhat hard to find in many of the cities that responded. And perhaps even more importantly, access to food was kind of hit and miss. It was not something that you would hope that within the city limits, access to food would be pretty green, and we did not actually see that in our responses. So if we go to the next slide, we again did the scatter plot on this, and again we see here that the cities that have the fewest amenities within the city limits are the smaller cities. And so this we thought we were onto something, but you'll all remember also that I pointed out the results were a glass that could be either half full or half empty. If we go to the next slide, we arrange the data by the population change since 2000, and we do not see that trend. We instead see that cities with a large percentage of amenities within the city limits had decreases in population, and cities that had low amounts of the amenities within the city had increases in population. So possibly there is not necessarily that relationship between population change and the number of amenities within the city limits. And this is where we start to get to the question of why we asked about proximity to these reference cities and amenities that are within 10 miles. When we get to the next slide, you'll see that our graph gets a lot greener when it comes to having access to these amenities within 10 miles of the city. In particular, I'll point out that food access goes almost completely green. And we also see public safety and emergency services and so forth. They're all within 10 miles. So there's been some regional activity going on here, and not just cities trying to get the amenities within their city limits, which is a trend that we'll probably want to look to build on based upon the rest of the results that we have. We go to the next slide. We can again see in the scatter plot here, we now start to see that over 80% of the amenities that we listed were within 10 miles of some of the smallest cities and some of the largest. And so the population does not necessarily make a difference here. And population change also in the next slide. We start to see it's again kind of a random scatter between how much the population changed or what the population is and the location of those amenities. So it initially seemed to kind of be showing up that maybe in southern Minnesota, the smaller cities were losing their vitality. That isn't necessarily the case. And there are a number of cities that are moving in the other direction, regardless of population size and population change. So to summarize kind of our high-level findings, just before I turn it over to Camilla to get into the real weeds here, or I should say into the detail, because these are hopefully not just weeds. But what we did find on the positive side is that while we did see some population decrease and of possible areas of concern, more cities reported population gain. And the infrastructure, as you'll see, that was reported was largely in good condition. In particular, broadband access and single-family housing were reported to be in very, very good shape. Cities that had the best reported infrastructure were Lewiston and Stockton. And cities that had large quantities of the amenities included Preston, Rushford, and Spring Grove. But on the other side of the coin, in the next slide, there could be some areas that might be areas for further attention. Traditional assets that a member of the Generation X generation, as I am, would have considered to be something to look for and desirable in a community, such as a radio station, bookstores, a local pharmacy. Those were very rare throughout the region, if they existed at all. There were a few cities that noted particular weakness in certain types of infrastructure. And as we get into it, we may see that they've got some opportunities to collaborate. But then overall, across the region, local streets were deemed as needing more attention than county or state highways. Housing options that were not single family, mobile homes, apartments, and possibly more affordable housing also was deemed to be not as strong, and a fair amount of concern about flood and stormwater management and infrastructure as well. So hopefully that has kind of got you interested into what was all behind it, and I will now turn it over to Camilla to get into the details of that data.
Thank you, Frank. So as Frank mentioned, we'll look into some areas of infrastructure investment. So those areas are, or we categorize them in the transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure, housing infrastructure, telecommunications and digital infrastructure, and education. So when we talk about the transportation infrastructure, what we found is that There's kind of a regional investment needed in local streets, and I will go further in detail in a moment. And that state roads are generally in good condition, but there could be some regional investments, especially in the southeast part of the region. In terms of water infrastructure, we also found some need for investments in flood infrastructure and improvements in stormwater management. In terms of housing infrastructure, we found that in most of the cities, single-family homes and townhouses were recently improved, and because of that, we see kind of a good condition. But there is some investment needed in affordable housing, mobile homes, and apartments. When we talk about telecommunications and digital infrastructure, overall, there is a good coverage of the broadband, especially in residences. And then there might need some improvement in the cell coverage. And when we talk about education infrastructure, when it exists, it's overall in good condition. Next slide. So when we look into transportation infrastructure, here are all the assets that we ask information for. So most of the cities that responded to the survey mentioned having kind of average, fair, or poor conditions in their local streets. And notice that there are some kind of small groups that also mention having average condition in their county highways or state US number highways. Next slide. So when we map this, we notice that areas that could need some investment in their local streets are kind of in the center, Claremore and Mentorville, and also kind of in the southeast part of the region. Again, if we look into those that mention county highway investments and state highway investments are also kind of located in these areas. So those are kind of areas in which they could come together to do some investments in their transportation system. Next slide, please. When we look into water infrastructure, so we ask about 4: stormwater, sanitary infrastructure, potable water, and flood. So notice that in the stormwater management, there's a large number of cities that mention having average, fair, or even poor condition of that infrastructure. And then when we look into flood, some of them mention having or like not having that infrastructure in the city or really not reporting any quality about that infrastructure. Next. So when we look into the map, again, we see the areas that mention that they have kind of fair condition in their quality stormwater management. It's located also as well in that center of the region. Next slide. And then when we look into flood mitigation, what we see is like there is kind of a small group of cities located on the west side of the region that will need some investment to improve their flood mitigation infrastructure. Next slide. When we talk about the housing infrastructure, so as I mentioned, twin houses and single family homes are the ones that have recently improved in most of the cities that responded to a survey. And then if you can see in apartment, mobile home, and affordable housing, those are the ones in which most of the cities reporting not being improved in recent years. Next slide. So when we look into the quality, again, we see more green areas in single-family home and twin houses. Lewiston kind of we highlight Lewiston as one of the ones mentioning having excellent condition across all infrastructures. Next slide, please. And when we map for affordable housing, we also see like a bigger concentration of cities mentioning having a fair condition towards the center of the region. Next slide. When we look into the quality of apartments, we see like more buckets of cities mentioning having average to fair condition. So these are kind of like dispersed throughout the region, but again, kind of forming some groups that suggest that cities could come together to address some of the improvements that they have in their apartment infrastructure. Next slide. When we look into mobile homes, Again, there is like a more spread of cities mentioning having a fair condition of the mobile homes, and this is mostly on the center and southeast part of the region. Next slide. So when we talk about telecommunications and digital infrastructure, so we ask about the broadband in residences and broadband in institutions. So notice that most of the cities responded having an excellent condition in there. There's only kind of 2 of them mentioning having a fair to poor condition. And overall, when we look into mobile LTE or less than 1 megabyte or 5G, like most of the cities reported not having that within their city limits. Next slide, please. So when we map the quality of the broadband in residences, so here we notice is that 2 cities at the kind of the edges of the region are the ones who are reporting fair to poor condition. So these cities could benefit from like talking with nearby cities to improve that quality that they see in the region. Next slide. When we talk about 5G cellular coverage, again, we see kind of a very good distribution across the region. But if we notice in the north west part of the region, kind of they mentioned that the data didn't exist. So it could be like or this could suggest that these cities could come together to start gathering some of the data to report like what's their condition, and from that information, do the investments that they need to do. Next slide. When we talk about the telecommunications infrastructure, we also ask about their media and communications. So notice here that most cities use social media in their cities to either communicate with their populations, and because of that, it's very important to have a good quality of their broadband. But when we ask about like TV stations or radio stations, notice that most of the cities reporting having one of those spots outside of the city within 10 to 25 miles, or even like beyond 25 miles. So that was what Frank was referring into his findings at the beginning. Next slide, please. So when we map again newspapers in the area, at least what we see is that cities located in the southeast part of the region don't really have like a newspaper in the city, right? It could be that nearby cities are providing those services for them. Next slide. So when we talk about the education infrastructure, we only ask about the quality of public infrastructure. So here we're not included anything about private. And when we talk about childcare, we were looking into licensed childcare. So we're not talking about kind of education that's happening at homes. So notice that when that infrastructure is in the cities, that infrastructure tend to be in excellent to good condition. There are very few that report having a fair condition, especially Wanamingo in their pre-K to 5th grade schools. Next slide, please. When we map this again, throughout the region, like a good condition, at least in childcare centers. Next slide, please. As well in public pre-K to 5th grade, a little bit of no data in the center of the region. Next slide, please. The same happens to public schools between 6th grade and 8th grade. Next slide. And then kind of a similar distribution in public education in 9 to 12 schools. Next slide. So in addition to looking into like this infrastructure that I just mentioned, we were looking into different amenities. So we categorize these in 11 kind of broader categories, and most of them have between 4. The highest has like about 21 assets. So I don't want to go, in terms of time, I don't want to go through all of them, but we have information for all of them. So if you require any information, just let me know. I will go through like some specific data that we found in here. Next slide. So when we look into public safety and emergency services, we ask about post office, police stations, fire trucks, and ambulances. So notice that in most of these cities, they report having a fire truck and a post office within the city. Police departments it is one of the ones that cities reporting, or like more cities reporting having one within 10 to 25 miles. Next slide. But overall, there is kind of a lot of services, public safety services within cities. In terms of health and social services, so most of the cities reporting having a hospital, a pharmacy, or urgent care outside of the city within 10 to 25 miles, or even beyond 25 miles. Most cities kind of report having long-term care within the city, or even like within 10 miles of the city. Cities that are reporting having these services within the city are Rochefort and Winnebago. Next slide. So when we map the medical clinic, the dental clinic, the area that we're highlighting here could be one of the ones that will need to come together and see what are those kind of improvements that they will need for their health and medical clinics and dental clinics. One of the things could be that because of their proximity to bigger cities, these services are provided by those bigger cities and they don't have them within the city limits. If we go into the next slide, we'll see the distribution of the pharmacy. So again, most of the cities mentioned not having a pharmacy in their city. And the ones that mention having a pharmacy in their city limits are those located here in the southeast part of the region. So one thing that we kind of discussed a little bit is that it could be that because they have a good presence of broadband, there are now pharmacy services that are being online, and they are receiving deliveries from nearby pharmacies. So small cities may not need to have a pharmacy in their city limits. Again, this doesn't happen for all the cities, but at least for some could be an explanation. The next one. Agricultural and farm services. So again, when we discuss about these services, most of the cities do have a grain elevator in their city limits or within the 10 miles. Preston, Rochefort, and Rochefort Village are the ones that mention having most of the assets that we listed in our survey. Again, next slide. If we look into the distribution, we see that it's kind of spread throughout the region. When we look into food services and access, something that we notice is that all cities reported having a bar within the city, and the same as restaurants. Very, very few cities not in having this within 10 miles. In terms of fast food store, most cities also report having them within 10 miles. But there is also like a interesting number of cities that have them within 10 miles or even like beyond 25 miles. If we go to the next slide and we map grocery store food shelf, we see that again, the center of the region the cities in the center of the region didn't mention having these ones in their city limits. So again, it could be something that they could come together and discuss. The recreation, culture, and tourism, this is one of the ones that had a lot of assets. And that's why we saw at the beginning that this one has a lot of reds. But when we look into all the assets here, most of the cities reported having a municipal park within the city limits. And the cities that reported most of these assets are Spring Grove and Wanamingo. Next slide. Looking into lodging and hospitality, Preston and Lesboro are the ones that have all the three categories, bed and breakfast, rental, vacation rental, and hotels. And if we go to next slide, these are concentrated in the southeast part of the region. Next slide. When we look into retail, commerce, and consumer services, so most of these are outside of the city within 10 to 25 miles. And it could be, and the ones that like most cities mention not having are bookstores, bike stores, and big box stores. Some of the cities highlighted here are the ones who have like a large quantity of the services that we listed, so like Brownsdale, Glenville, Mason Lake, and Preston. Next slide. And next slide. And then when we look into government, institutional, and civic services, some of the ones highlighted here in red, the car house, human services, are some services that are mostly present in county heads. So maybe because of that, small cities don't tend to have that. The same as UMN Extension and SWCD office. Glenville, Preston, and Spring Grove are those cities that mention having most of the assets that we ask in this part. Next slide. So after we kind of developed these results of the survey, we did some outreach events. So we went to different places in Southeast Minnesota to talk with community members like you to see what was interesting for them in this data, what is new, what are additional things that we didn't see that we could see, and then, well, this webinar that we're having today, and we are engaging nearly 100 participants across the region as of today. Next slide. What did we hear? So common themes in the conversation is that there has to be kind of a continual awareness of the need for community investments. And there is a communication and common language as an active effort. Some of the people that attended to these community events mentioned some of the potential uses of this data. So this data could be used for strengthening grant applications and support discussions across communities. Also inspire collaboration and buy-in from other communities, inform new projects and initiatives across the region. So as we mentioned, like there are some areas in which some cities could come together and start conversations or initiatives across for improvements in their infrastructure, and then encourage the small cities to work together to find some, or like broader that range of economic opportunities. Next slide. So we also hear some ideas to enhance the current data. So right now, these data looks into a specific, like what the current status of the infrastructure in a specific time of the year, right? So some additional questions that could be asked is, what are existing plans for upgrades, or what are the limitations for any upgrades that you see? And there are the quantities of that current infrastructure mentioned that we hear in this survey. We didn't ask for any quantities of infrastructure that they have. Conduct any follow-up survey, could be 5 years from now, to the same participant communities to see what are the changes that have occurred since we started this survey. And then it could also be possible to expand participation to include cities that have a larger population. So that includes those with 2,000 or 5,000 residents. So here we're gonna do a stop, and I'm gonna share my screen. I want to show you the toolkit that was developed as part of this project. So you will have access to this toolkit. I will send you the link, but this is the link. You will have the tutorial. So if you need to know how to use it, you can have that from here, the instructions tutorial. Data, you can also have the raw data from all the cities that responded to the survey in this accessing to this link. You also will have access to all the slides that I just shared using this other link, and all the GIS data that we use for creating these maps. So what you will see is this as the first part of the link. You will come here to this icon that kind of has like 3 layers, and then you will have access to all the information that we asked. So just make sure that when you want to see, you kind of have the eye showing. So let's say if you want to see like, well, what's the distribution of the police department? So the post offices. So they will pop up in here. If you have any questions, you can also start working with or like looking in the data. So let's say one of the questions that we received when we were having these community meetings was what's the relation for those cities that have had a flood and the quality of their flood infrastructure. So if we go here into water and house infrastructure and gas infrastructure, sorry, you open here and you will see where is it? Flood mitigation and prevention. So we make sure that we have the eye, and then we open the eye for the flood mitigation. So here you will see the conditions, so excellent, good, average, and then kind of how it is spread out through the region. Then if we come here to environmental risk, again, we look into our eye and we'll look into those that have had any flood damage. So you will see like this city had a flood damage, and actually their infrastructure is in fair condition. And then you can also come here into locations so that you can see survey cities. And if you click on top of it, it will show you which is the city that we're discussing. And then you can also put an eye on which ones are the reference cities. So you will see them as a star. So you can notice like, are they close to the reference cities or not? And you can do your own like mapping to try to answer any questions that you may have. So you will have access to these, and we hope you find these very useful. And then, well, thank you so much for hearing us today. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email, either to Frank or to me. We're happy to respond to any of your questions.